people say yes to those they owe. Let's just say it that way. And what I always recommend to people is if you want to be more influential, let's say you go into a room with people and you want to be influential and getting those people to assist you in some way or do something that will increase your outcomes. You shouldn't go in with the first question, who can help me here? Right? The first question should be, whom can I help here?
I am delighted today. My conversational partner is Dr. Robert Cialdini. Robert Cialdini is known as the foundational expert in the science of influence. Robert is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today best-selling author with over 5 million copies sold in 44 different languages. He's the president and CEO of Influence at Work. Dr. Cialdini received his PhD from the University of North Carolina and post-doctoral training from Columbia University. Dr. Cialdini was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2018 and the National Academy of Sciences in 2019. Robert's work and books have been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, Inc., and the Psychology Today magazine, as well as many, many more. Dr. Cialdini, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm happy to be with you and your followers.
Such a pleasure. So, I figured a great place to start is obviously with the big news. Your legendary book, Influence, is now new and updated. I read through it this weekend. Absolutely phenomenal. I figured just a great place to start would be just really what made you want to update the book?
Well, there was a pull and a push there because the previous edition had continued to be selling well and appearing in various languages and so on. But I remembered a quote that my grandfather used to favor, which was, if you want things to stay the same, things are going to have to change around here. And that was, it seemed to me, an insightful commentary on where I was at that particular time. I do want things to continue to be positive, and that meant I had to come along with all of the new findings that had emerged since the last edition of the book. Had to recognize the importance of online platforms for presenting persuasive appeals or of one sort or another. And finally, the biggest one was that I thought I had identified a new universal principle of influence, new in the sense that it wasn't part of the previous editions, one that I call unity, that has to do with the extent to which people will be moved by a communicator in that communicator's direction to the extent that the communicator can arrange for them to see him or her as one of them, not just like them, not just similar to them, but of them, of an important social group that helps identify them, that essentially establishes their identity. And a perfect, I'll give you a quick example. A study was done on a college campus. Researchers had a young woman, college age, stand in a heavily trafficked area of campus and ask students going by for contributions to a legitimate charity. And she was getting some donations. But if she added one sentence to the request, she more than doubled donations. And the sentence was, I'm a student here too. In other words, I'm not just like you, I'm one of you. I am one of you. And then all kinds of barriers to influence came down. It turns out that within the groups we define as our we groups, people are more willing to believe a communicator, more willing to cooperate, more willing to trust, more willing, and here's the key, more willing to say yes. So I thought with the emphasis we see these days in politics and international and even national policies of one sort or another, tribalism is so fundamental to the choices people made. I thought it was important to talk about that pressure to say yes to people who are within our groups and to any communicator who can convince us that they belong inside our groups.
I really appreciate that. And I'm so excited to delve into many examples from the book. But one place I'd actually like to start is when I was reading the book, because obviously you were a very renowned academic at the same time. And one thing that I would love to just ask you, just as a kind of broad question, is what I love about influence is that you distill very specific academic papers. You've got case studies, literature, and everything in it that an academic would love. Except what you've done is you've made it so accessible to a wider range of people. And I would just love to kind of ask, was it challenging to distill, so many academic papers and studies and journals and put them all into a book, which anybody reading could get something out of?
It was difficult because I had to move away from the way that I traditionally, as an academic, thought about the communication process, how I framed my arguments, how I laced my language with various kinds of words that had specific associations to my academic audience. And I had to break away from that. But it seemed to me it was important to do so for a reason that actually has to do with one of the universal principles of influence that we talk about in the book, and that is reciprocation. That we're obligated to give back to others what they have first provided us. Right? And academics have been failing to give back to the larger community who have paid for their research in any meaningful way, have paid for the studies that they have done and then report in academic outlets, right? And it seemed to me that we owed the larger public the information that we had found out about them with their money. We owed it to them. They paid for it. There was a contract that I think we engaged in or entered into that said, all right, the non-academic community will fund this research with their taxes, with their donations to the universities and so on, and in hopes that they will get something back in terms of a better understanding of how we work as a species so they can comport themselves better and more economically and efficiently outside the situations where they encountered the information that we were setting, I mean, in their real world lives. So it seemed to me I had to pay special attention to that and make sure that the information was accessible.
And I'm so happy you did, because I've, as I mentioned during pre-recorded, and long-term listeners of the show will know I've been talking about your books for 3 or 4 years now on this show. So I'm so glad you're here. And I would just love to, let's just take the view from 30,000 feet, and we're going to get granular into the new principles of influence and various other things within the book. So if we just take an overarching view, you've identified now 7 principles of influence in the new and updated copy. Could you give us an outline of the 7 principles?
Surely. The first we've already alluded to, reciprocation, that says, by the way, in every human society, there is a rule that is taught to children from the outset. You must not take without giving in return. You can't do that. If you do that, there are very negative names that we assign to people who take without giving in return. I think in UK you call them spongers, you call them moochers or ingrates. rates or takers, and nobody wants to be assigned those languages. So we will go to great lengths to give back, and societies have made sure that we do that so that there's this well-functioning exchange between parties who can exchange resources of various different sorts and produce cooperative solutions to situations that any one person would not be able to surmount. So, that's one, is that people say yes to those they owe. Let's just say it that way. And what I always recommend to people is if you want to be more influential, let's say you go into a room with people and you want to be influential and getting those people to assist you in some way or do something that will increase your outcomes. You shouldn't go in with the first question, who can help me here? Mm-hmm. Right? The first question should be, whom can I help here? Whose circumstances can I elevate? Right. Whose outcomes can I enhance? Because there's a rule that was socialized into every one of those people that says, okay, now it's my turn. Now, when Joe asks me for something, or when I see that Joe needs something, it's my turn. I have to, by this rule, by what inside me tells me is the right thing to do, I have to step forward. So that's the rule for reciprocation. The second rule is one that's very obvious to almost anybody that I describe it to, liking. We prefer to say yes to the people we like. What's interesting, though, is that there are some small steps we can take to enhance the rapport that people feel with us before we ever address them with a recommendation or a proposal or request. And those two things are, on the one hand, pointing to genuine similarities that exist between us. We like the people who are like us. Right? Now, when I'm talking about liking and similarities, I'm talking about similar tastes, similar preferences, similar styles, and so on, that cause us to like that person. Oh, you're like me. That's different from unity, which we were talking about earlier, where the similarity is not in commonality of these things like preferences and styles, but similarity in membership inside an organization. So we can talk about that next. So similarity is one of those things. The other thing that we can do that's very powerful in getting greater rapport is to give honest compliments to people who genuinely warrant them. So another thing we can simply do is to recognize that if we go into a situation where we want people to like us more, we can first find something about them that we consider commendable and mention it. It's a process. So now, let's be honest. Some people it's more difficult than other people to find, but everybody has something, yes, right? Yes. And you have to spend that time, do your homework. The internet now exists where you can identify things about other people. This isn't information they're protecting. They give it to us on social media, LinkedIn and Facebook and so on. If we find things there that are similar to us, we can raise the similarity component. If we find things there that are admirable, we can raise the praise component of our interaction, simply point to it and comment on it. And the upshot is a better relationship from which to begin any next step. Next principle would be the principle of social proof. Nobody would be surprised, again, to learn that we prefer to follow the lead of a lot of others who around us. So one of the things that we can do is to honestly point to things that are that show that our product or service or idea has resonance with many other people, especially peers, especially people who have similar circumstances, and that causes them to reduce their uncertainty that our product or service or idea will be a positive thing for them too.
Can I just add one to back
Of
this up?
course, yeah,
Is when we started off this podcast, it was very, very difficult to get guests on, having no previous guests on. After
right.
100 episodes, and you can say in the psychology field that you've interviewed David Buss or Steven
Yeah.
Pinker or Chris Voss, it becomes a lot easier to get people on.
It worked on me, Joe. You did exactly the right thing. Now, we've got some new research that shows that at the beginning, where you are a startup of some sort, you don't have a lot of others to point to. There's some new research, I've contributed to it, but I'm hardly alone, right? That shows if you show a trend, that's enough. You don't have to show a majority. You don't even have to show a large percentage of people who are moving in your direction. You just have to show a trajectory. Because what people do when they see a trend is to project it into the future. It's a very human reaction on the part of who we are. We assume that if you have at least three data points to point to. So if you say you have a 20% market share, let's say. I'm not talking about your particular situation, but anybody says, we have 20% market share. That's a statistic. If you say 2 years ago it was 10%, that's a difference. But a difference could mean that last year it was 30% and now it's dropped down to, but a trend that says 2 years ago it was 10%, last year it was 15%, this year we're up to 20%, people will assume something we never had before to really characterize, and that is future social proof in your direction. Something that doesn't even exist yet, but people will project and they will base their decision on the future social proof that you have available for them to think about. Very powerful. Our results show if you show a trend, you get a bigger effect than any other way of presenting your case. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So we've got 4 so far.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah, and another one is one that also validates what you were saying about telling people who are candidates for being on your podcast that others have done it. They were people of real authority, right? Experts in their area. And one of the things we do to reduce our uncertainty about what we should choose is to look at what the experts are saying. What are the true authorities on a particular topic saying? So if we can marshal that information, present it to people, and again, before we even begin our attempt to move them, we just certify what we are about to say at the beginning. Here's the one thing I think people forget to do. They don't put those testimonials at the very beginning of their presentation. It's in the body of their presentations. They point to them. I think they should be at the beginning. And that aura of authority then infuses all of the next information that you present. And there's one other thing that we've recently learned about authority influence. You can increase it by multiplying it. That is, in keeping with the idea of social proof, what a lot of others are doing, if you can show that multiple authorities are their voices align with your voice in this. They are saying that either what you have is great, or they agree that your direction is great, or the idea you have is one that fits with their view of the world. Now you multiply your impact.
Yes.
Yeah. Next principle is commitment and consistency. People want to be consistent with what they have already said or done, and what they've already said or done has a term in academic language. It's a commitment. All right. If you've taken a position, taken a stand on some issue in some way or another, and if people will take a small step in your direction, if you can arrange for them to do that, now you have a platform from which to make a larger request that is consistent with the step they've already taken, and they'll be much more likely to say yes to it because they've already made a commitment in that direction. Next principle is scarcity. We prefer to say we prefer to have more of what we can have less of. It's just the way we're structured. We are reluctant to allow anything that's unique or uncommon or dwindling in availability to escape us. Right? That's especially true, by the way, of people. Let's say millennials. We're finding that very powerful because at that stage of their lives, they're still searching. They're still investigating the environment and themselves and trying things out. They don't want to let anything pass. So if we were to say in a presentation, this is not something you want to lose. This, because of its scarcity, because it's rare or dwindling in availability, that really gets younger people below 35 to move in that direction. It also gets older people, but the younger people are at a stage in their lives, they are still learning, and they want to be sure they know that all the options are available to them, and they've sampled those things. People over that age, more likely I would say over 50, they're more influenced by commitment and consistency. They have had a lot of experiences. They know who they are and what they like. And for those folks, if you point to what they have already said or done or committed themselves in the past to, that is congruent with what it is that you are offering them, that's the spur that's most likely to get them to move.
In terms
And then
of
finally, there's
sorry.
Could I just on the scarcity one, just one thing I was thinking about was over here, everybody wants a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, but you never see them advertised on television.
Right.
But you see a Ford Fiesta or a Volkswagen, and it's flooded with TV adverts. Is that a relation to the scarcity one?
Yeah, it means that not only are they scarce, there's an exclusivity associated with them, right? That causes people to want them more. Because there was an interesting study that was done by a student of mine. He had returned to school to get his PhD in marketing after starting a business in the Phoenix, Arizona area where I live. And he was importing beef into the United States from South America and Australia. And then he would sell it to large supermarket concerns. Well, he decided to do a study for his doctoral dissertation where he told his salespeople who contacted their customers by phone to call all their customers, but to divide them randomly into three groups. One group got the standard appeal regarding a new allotment of beef that had just come in. We think this is a good time to buy. How many carloads of beef would you like? The second group were told, And we've just gotten some information that the because of certain weather conditions in Australia, there's likely to be a shortage of Australian beef. That scarcity information doubled purchasing. But here was the key for me that I thought was so important. The third group were told about this weather set of conditions in Australia. And then they were told this information comes to us from our exclusive sources in the Australian National Weather Service in Canberra. No one else has this information yet. So now you get the scarcity 1-2 punch, scarcity plus exclusivity, and 6 times as many people. No, people bought six times as much beef under those circumstances. So your point is really well taken. It's exclusivity as well as scarcity that doubles up on this scarcity effect.
That is really, really powerful.
And then we've already talked a little bit about unity.
I think like that. I mean, I should just give some context into the impact that your work has had. And I think it was in Persuasion that I read, or it may have been on a podcast. But basically in 2019, I was going for a managerial position. And I heard you on another podcast, and you give this tip about what to do before an interview.
Yeah.
So I sat down at the interview, and I was up against a panel of four people evaluating me. And I sat down and I said, look, thanks for bringing me in. Before we start, could you please just tell me, what it was on my CV that, you liked, that you wanted to bring me in for? And the lady sitting opposite me, she said, we really like this specific experience that you've got in this one area. And I kind of clocked that. Throughout the interview, I kept winding my answers back to my to my experience in the one area. That is so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something that I developed. I have an acquaintance who said that he was using that strategy and it got him 3 better jobs in a row. But what I like about it is that it doesn't just alert you to what it is that they were already committed to, your strengths, so that you could bring that back and remind them of that commitment that they already had to you in your resume. But it gets them to make an active public commitment to you right there, to focus on your strengths. Here's the thing that we really like about you. Now, for the rest of the interview, they are committed to that positive view of you, which makes it more likely they will continue to proceed in that vein.
Yes. And is that because we have this desire to be consistent with ourselves? So when I'm saying, Robert is great and he's a great writer and he's this, when I go away tonight after this interview, for me to say opposite, that would cause me some internal discomfort. Is that a reason why?
Is that exactly right? Both internally and to anyone who heard this interview.
Yes.
You wouldn't want to be seen as somebody who says one thing and then says the reverse a few hours later. That's not somebody that people like.
Yes. Yes. So if we get kind of granular, and since we're on the topic of jobs and interviews and whatnot, in the book, you talk about interviewers assigning candidates wearing high quality apparel certain things that and traits that would lead to better job suitability and starting salaries. Could you elaborate on this one?
Yeah. Now, this was a study that looked at job interviews across a variety of different settings and industries. And they found that if the candidate wore higher quality clothing, they were assigned the trait of greater competence. That the positive associations with the clothing flowed into trait attributions regarding this individual, right? Which is a little worrisome, isn't it?
It is.
That people would make that automatic connection, even though they had resumes and previous histories in front of them, that they would allow that superficial. I mean, in both senses of the word, superficial. It was just what they were wearing. Let that bleed into their decision making, but they did.
How could we turn that principle into something that we could apply at a next job interview, for instance?
Well, again, we need to be mindful of that bias on the part of individuals, even those individuals who were looking deeply into our background and history and credentials. There's something else that's going on that we can manage, and that is how we comport ourselves just by the clothing we wear. It seems to me it's worth the expense of making sure that you are dressed in a way that implies that you have this competence in people's minds. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I would love to just kind of circle back. And if we just pick up on influence in the digital era, because it was some time ago when the original copy came out. So I would just have to pick up on how does social influence now get impacted by the kind of online digital world that we're living in?
So I'm going to say two things that seem opposite to one another, but are not. The first is the digital platforms have not changed the power of any of these principles or the applicability of those principles to people's decisions. So what we have found, for example, there was a study done of 6,700 digital commerce sites. And the researchers looked at A/B tests within them for factors that made the biggest difference in moving people into conversion, from prospect to customer. And they identified 29 separate factors. Some of them were technological. Is there a search function within the... Okay. Some of them were economic. Do they provide a free delivery? Some of them were just persuasive. Do they have a call to action line at the end of the appeal? These kinds of things. But the 6 principles of influence that I had identified at that point were the 6 that rose above all of those others, right? And within the 6, the one that was most effective was scarcity, limited number scarcity. So that if you could honestly say to people, there are only so many available at this price or with this upgrade or with this payment plan, or we can only offer this to so many of our people, that's all we have available for them. That was the most powerful, right? Next was social proof. The one that said, all these other people are doing it, and you better do it because there's a trend. We're seeing a trend. Right? So exactly what the research has shown, to the extent that the third principle was also scarcity, but not scarcity of number, limited number. It was limited time availability. This offer is only available for the next week or the next month, fortnight, whatever it is. Right? And our research outside of the internet had shown exactly that same result. You take the two forms of scarcity, limited number, limited time, limited number wins over limited time, and there's a reason that we've identified. It's competition. If there's a limited number, it means you better move now, or the amount will be depleted. You won't have any, right? Because there are other people who are doing it. Limited time says within this time you can move at any point. You don't have to jump now. You don't have to be spurred into action now. Exactly what we find outside of the internet works on the internet too. All right, so what I'm saying is we can change the platforms on which we deliver these principles, but we don't really change the power of the principles. They're the same ones that have worked in other situations. But here's where I'm going to say what seems like the opposite of this. There's one principle that has allowed us to use this principle significantly more frequently than we were able to before, and that is, and the internet is allowed, and it's social proof. Because we now have access to voices, to people, to experiences, to star ratings from all kinds of people we never would have been able to make contact with in just a person-to-person fashion, right? Now we have all these sources of information about what others have done, what their experiences were, what their opinions are, what their ratings are. And so I would say that what the internet has done is to make social proof a more frequent source of information for us because we have greater access to it. I saw an article that said that of the people who shop religiously online, right? Almost everything they do comes from an online source. They said 98% of them said they check product reviews before they buy, right? They check what other people have said.
Yes.
98%. We can't get 98% of the people in the world to believe that the earth is round. But we can get 98% of this group to pile into this particular source of information now because it's so available to us. Yeah.
I would love to ask a quirky example about the digital age. I interviewed Professor David Buss, who had done a lot of studies into the dating app Tinder. And Professor Buss said that through his research, he found that if somebody said that they had an undergraduate degree on their profile, they were about 30% less likely to get swiped on than someone that said they had a postgraduate degree. And also he found that if a man had pictures of just himself, he was about 40% less likely to get swiped on than if he had pictures of himself in a group of friends. Do you have any thoughts on those?
So the second one certainly makes sense because but I think what women are looking for is somebody who's a people person, somebody who's going to be sociable and who will talk with them and be somebody who is comfortable with other people. Because, my experience is when you look at the literature on what leads women to divorce, it's guys who won't talk to them, partners who just are silent, who don't bring them in to an everyday exchange. So that kind of image makes great sense to me, I think. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the power of giving genuine compliments. How can we use social influence to greatly improve our personal relationships?
You know, Joe, this was my greatest weakness. This is my greatest weakness, giving warranted compliments. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a research meeting with my graduate students, and uh, I hear myself, or I would hear myself say, "Oh, what Brad just said there was brilliant," or "Oh, how Rosanna just characterized our current situation leads us directly to what next step we should take." And I would say it to myself. And I would lose all of the goodwill that would come from giving an honest and deserved compliment to people. Right? And I've changed that now. Right? Whenever I hear myself saying such a complimentary thing about somebody else, my default now is not just nod to myself, oh yeah, okay, let's take that into account and take our next step based on it. I move it from my mind to my tongue and I provide that information. But there's one particular form of it that I found to be very effective as well. And that is to give compliments that you want people to continue, for behaviors you want them to continue to behave, to enact. Um, and there's something that Henry Kissinger was once asked. Now he was considered the U.S. the greatest international negotiator, bargainer in the U.S. at the time that he was Secretary of State, and he was asked, so of all the bargainers, international negotiators that you saw, who do you think was most effective? And he named Anwar Sadat of Egypt, right? And he said, what Sadat would do is give his bargaining opponent a reputation that he wanted that opponent to live up to. So if he was dealing with the Israelis, and let's say under circumstances where the Israelis had more power in the situation, you know, for whatever reason, military power, whatever it was at the time, he would say, you know, I'm so glad to be interacting with you because I know how important from your history it is that Israelis understand the importance of fairness and equity and and um, uh, and being even-handed with people, even when they're not in positions of power. And Kissinger said he would give them this compliment that gave them a reputation to live up to, and they did. Kissinger said it was amazing. They did what he was hoping they would do because he labeled them with that kind of praise that they wanted to live up to. So I find myself sometimes doing this. I have a newspaper delivery guy who rolls by my house every morning. His name is Kurt, right? And so Kurt throws a newspaper out the window of his automobile onto my driveway, and about 75% of the time he gets it in the middle so that it doesn't get wet from the watering systems on either side. But what Kurt also always does is to, around the holidays, the Christmas holidays, he includes in one issue of the newspaper a little envelope addressed to him. And I know what it's for. It's for me to send him a check as a tip for all his service during the year. And I always do that. But this year, I remembered what Kissinger was saying about giving people a reputation to live up to. And so I included a little note on that I appended to the check that said, Kurt, thank you for your conscientiousness that you've shown in getting the newspaper in the middle of the driveway. I really appreciate that. In the past, he got it in the middle about 75% of the time. This year, 100%. He's living up to the compliment, to the reputation I gave to him about being a conscientious deliverer of my newspaper. Yeah.
I love that one so much. I appreciate we've got just a couple of minutes left, so I thought we could fire through some quick fire ones.
Sure.
One from the book that I found was particularly insightful was about a Jewish rabbi during World War II. Could you talk about the single sentence that he used that protected the Jewish community in Japan from the Nazis?
At a point at near the beginning of the Second World War, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Jewish communities in Japan were threatened because the Nazis were agitating for the Japanese to treat them the way the Nazis were treating Jews in Europe. And to their credit, the Japanese called on the Jewish communities to send a couple of representatives to give their case, their side of the case here. And when they did, there were two rabbis. One was known to be an especially wise kind of psychologist guy. He was the one who, if you had trouble with inside your family, or you had some kind of a deal with neighbors that was going awry, if you talked to him, he would give good counsel because he understood human dynamics. So anyway, at the meeting, these two rabbis were there, and there's a tribunal of Japanese military officers, and they said, "Okay, let's cut right to the chase here. Why do our allies, the Nazis, hate you so much? And secondly, why should we side with you against our allies?" Right? And this rabbi, known for his psychological understanding, said, "Because we're Asian like you. We're of you. You're of us. With the Nazis, they hate us for the same reason they're going to hate you. You're not one of the master race. You're Asian. That's why they hate us. Secondly, this is why you should take our side versus their. That's just what you have now is a temporary wartime alliance. What we share with you is membership in a self-defining group, Asians, right?" And 45 minutes later, they were leaving. They left. The rabbis left the room with the promise that their communities would not be harmed during the war, and so it was.
That's so beautiful. I want to just fire through quick fire steeple ones, which we always ask our guests at the end, and then please, we want to ask you where these guys can get the new book and all about your work. So I always ask our guests at the end of every podcast, what makes a life worth living?
A contribution. In fact, a life of contribution. That's what it is. That's how I've always tried to talk to my kids about how they should arrange themselves. Now, you can make contributions in all kinds of areas, but the idea is to make contributions to the larger good in that area rather than just your own individualistic outcomes. Yeah.
I love that answer. I want to pay my gratitude to you because, as I said at the start, I've been a fan of your work for many years. I feel like you were really trying to make your work accessible and also to really, really improve the lives of the people that read it. So let me pay my gratitude to you for making our lives better.
Well, thank you. I appreciate hearing that.
My pleasure. Robert, where can these guys connect with you, and where can they get the new updated influence and whatever else you've got going on?
Yes, so our website is influenceatwork.com, and they can get access to what we do there. I mean, the book, but also we have training programs, including a new on-demand online training program for ethical influence. If you want to be more influential and still ethical at the same time, we have that available, and various other kinds of sources of information about the influence process that are available there too.
I'm going to link these guys to everything which we've discussed today. This has been such a pleasure, such a treat for me. Robert, thank you so much for coming on the show.
I enjoyed it, Joe. I did.